I thought you might be interested in hearing a little bit about the history of trees in Ireland. And I suppose one time in Ireland, coast to coast, from north to south and east to west, the land was covered in trees, and many have heard and have said that at one stage a squirrel could pass from Dublin over to Connemara without touching the ground. Ireland's history really boasts achievements in stone and bronze, but really, the forest is really where the Irish have come from. We're forest people, and our fair skin isn't just about the weather. It's about being under the overhanging trees and making our living in the shade of those trees and feeding from those trees and the animals and biodiversity that live beneath it. The Irish language itself is based on an 18-letter alphabet, each letter pronounced after the name of a tree. And while the Romans destroyed much of the ancient forests of Europe, a huge percentage of Ireland was under forestry up until probably the 17th century. And Ireland had clusters of very, very valuable ancient woodlands of hardwood timber, which is a kind of precious and valuable commodity. And the story of Ireland's trees and the deforestation of Ireland is a topic that's probably underreported, getting more media coverage now. And I think Ireland will probably have the lowest percentage of land covered in forest in Europe. And in terms of ancient forests, it has the lowest yet again. Not something to be proud of. And while Ireland has struggled with reforestation, we've probably spent too much time creating plantations rather than woodlands, plantations being of a monoculture. The Tudors, when they began to survey Ireland, they found that they were dealing with disappointing levels of Irish woodlands. And I think it was Eileen McCracken wrote about how Ireland's forests were only about 12.5% by the time the Tudors arrived. And then there was others that suggested it was probably even lower, maybe at 4%. But another cause of decline in Ireland's trees was the Elizabethan wars for military purposes, and timber was required, and a lot of speculators where there's money, there's carnage, and trees were harvested, and many people were granted lands before Cromwell even arrived in Ireland. One of them being the famous Sir Walter Raleigh, who was granted 20,000 acres of woodland across Cork. And then he sold that on to a chap called Richard Boyle, who bought himself a title. It's interesting. What else would you do with your money when you've got everything? And then I suppose there was necessary to build wooden containers for provisions to be sent to the colonies and in America. And in the 1600s, these were coming from Ireland. So an industry developed in making casks and barrels for transportation. And look, well, there are loads and loads of different opinions and research, but much of Ireland's ecosystem has gone, and much of the forestry of Ireland that was available was cleared as part of a military operation by England to secure the colony that was Ireland. Elizabeth was famous for her destruction of the woodlands to stop or to deprive the Irish of their shelter. Terrible thing to do. But anyway, look, many species were lost, including the wolf, and probably in the 18th century, and the wild boar. But there are small areas of woodland that have survived in Ireland that are ancient woodlands, and the descendants of the planters that would come into Ireland that inherited larger estates. Well, I suppose they probably saw, they could clearly see the loss of trees, and about 25 million trees were planted between 1766 and 1803. And but without this continuing support, the tree planting in Ireland declined, and Ireland became an agricultural producer, and pretty much is still to this day. And then in the 19th century, Ireland struggled with Catholic emancipation and the Great Famine, poverty, and I suppose declined the population because of emigration. And then farmers, small farmers and farms getting smaller and smaller. I suppose land needed to be clear. Charles Stewart Parnell devoted a lot of his interest to the restoration of Irish forests, and the government realised that Ireland was missing this resource, and like Britain, who was also planting pretty much conifers for their speed of their growth, because they're so fast in growing compared to hardwood deciduous forests. The Irish forestry was established, I think it was in 1900, and I think it was founded about 20% of Ireland, which was thought to be wasteland, could probably be planted with forestry, so making something unproductive into something productive. And in 1948, Ireland finally saw an increase in tree planting led by Sean McBride and I think it was Laura Dobson. And Caoilte in Ireland at the moment is probably producing 25 million bare-rooted plants every year. Most of these are used to renew our own forests. A lot of conifers, in fairness, for planting, and seed is required every year. So Caoilte, in responding to this, knowing that all years aren't good for seed, they actually set up the National Tree Seed Centre. And another movement is the Forestry Service, is a private forestry company. They specialise in forestry services to help woodland owners make sure that they plant properly, well planned, well managed, and it'll also help them get grants from Teagasc. So I suppose interest in forestry is growing dramatically, and planting trees is becoming more and more popular. Obviously, it has a huge environmental benefit, and every individual can make a difference. Whether you plant a tree in your garden, or if you secure a tree through a dedicated planting service similar to Irish trees or Irish memorial trees, you are making a difference, and every tree matters, and every time you do it, you're helping the reforestation of Ireland, but you're also helping the environment. So be part of history and get going on that. Thanks very much for listening.